Just as we are now preparing for a new console generation to start by the end of this year, 2013 was a year of transition for the video game industry. So before going any further, let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? Nintendo had just launched the Wii U, and normally I would have been one of the earliest adopters of their consoles. Yet, like many other people, I decided to skip out on it. Since I owned both an Xbox 360 and Wii while in high school, my focus shifted over to what Microsoft had up their sleeve for their next console. Let's just say that when they revealed the Xbox One, I wasn't sure I was going to continue playing Xbox games in the foreseeable future. But on top of that, right around the time that both the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 were scheduled to release, I myself was scheduled to report for a 2-year mission for my church. When LDS missionaries go out and serve, they more or less live like monks, with one major restriction for their lifestyle being that they cannot ever play video games. So, I felt no need to buy a new console, since it would have just sat on my shelf for a couple of years. Later, after returning home, I decided to get a PlayStation 4 the day after Christmas in 2015. I've been quite a happy PlayStation fan since then, and my love for Nintendo was rekindled when I bought a Switch in 2017. For the longest time, I had no regrets missing out on the Xbox One, since the lack of compelling exclusives resulted in very little incentive for me to get it. Cuphead, however, was always one of those games that made me guilty for a lack of an Xbox in my home, given how gorgeous and insanely fun it looked. But then...
I will now begin to pour.
Well, Cuphead's on his way, he's found one man in tow. Going adventuring to escape the devil's throat. You can play at your home, but now here's something rich. You can play while you roam, Cuphead's coming to Switch.
Oh yes! In the months that followed, I would come back to this game multiple times, occasionally taking extended breaks due to how beaten down I was by its notoriously high difficulty. And it wasn't until a couple of months ago that I finally worked up the motivation to play it through to completion, and after doing so, it became one of my favorite games ever. But what exactly is it that stands out to me about Cuphead though? After all, there are many people out there who have tried Cuphead and adamantly hate it due to its punishing difficulty. Well, if I'm being honest though, that's exactly why I love it. For a good legitimate challenge is something I crave after in a video game. Sure, an unbalanced mess like any Call of Duty title on Veteran induces enough stress to cause a stroke. However, the beauty of Cuphead is that the only reason players have a tough time with it is because of their lack of dedication and skill at the game. I hate to be so blunt, but that's what I believe. With this masterful side-scrolling extravaganza, the player has every tool at their disposal to conquer every single boss and run-and-gun level. The controls are basically perfect, the weapons are varied and effective, and using the smoke bomb is your one-way ticket to success in pretty much any level. I don't mean to argue that the game isn't nail-bitingly tough, for it absolutely is. Heck, I spent about 20 hours between single-player and co-op trying to beat it all, but at no point did I really feel like the game was being unfair though. Rather, Cuphead requires your undivided attention as it throws one daunting challenge after another at you. Like I said, I love a good challenge, so the game very easily stole my attention and kept me engaged, since there's absolutely no dull moment to be found here. Each level, the game throws everything it has at you, forcing you to shift your attention between so many different things at once. At one moment you might be checking out what the boss is doing, watching out for 50 billion projectiles, especially the pink ones, making sure you land on platforms, catching all of the warning signs of an attack. It's all a tight balancing act that never stops being tense, even in the easier levels. That's why I really appreciated the earlier levels in not skimping out on core difficulty, but rather having simpler bosses to analyze. The developers understood that like with any other game, you have to really get a handle on the controls first before getting a serious challenge. Despite dying a lot during those earlier boss fights, the smooth learning curve encouraged me to keep getting better. And that's what I did. Each time, I would work through the frustration of losing, try to figure out what went wrong, and then try something else. By doing this, I progressively learned more about each boss and how to exploit their weaknesses. Even though some bosses like Beppy the Clown are ball-bustingly annoying, I conquered them all. And all of them felt good to come back and fight, for each level is short, with the fact that each boss battle can realistically be beaten within 2 to 3 minutes. This made it so that I was able to keep getting back on my feet without becoming too frustrated. That way, the fun never stopped. My adrenaline was kept very high as I fought hard, carefully used my weapons, and used my upgrades to win the day. It all culminated in a thrilling clash with the devil himself. The previous casino level was already exhausting, but then figuring out how to take down Satan was a stressful ordeal on its own. I remained motivated to push through to the end, and when I finally beat him, I was so excited that I actually shrieked like SpongeBob did at the Krusty Krab 2's grand opening. This perfectly describes how my whole experience with the game was like. With this constant uphill battle I had to fight, the pressure was always on to do my best. Because of this, no matter how many times I died, I kept on going, eager for that feeling of ecstasy when the announcer shouts, "No!" When I wasn't put through the ringer by the many boss battles or run and gun levels, I would otherwise just find joy in soaking in the beautiful artwork created for this universe. It's extremely rare to find any show or movie 100% drawn by hand nowadays, let alone a video game that consistently runs at 60 frames per second. But somehow the Moldenhauer brothers, the masterminds behind the game, pulled it off. Starting all the way back in 2010, this team worked tirelessly to animate characters in the most painstaking way you can imagine, which involved creating individual hand-drawn cells with pen and ink. Chad Moldenhauer then hand-painted all of the environments with watercolors, with them often morphing and shifting around in the background as the rest of the action unfolds in the foreground. On top of that, all of the characters run at 24 frames per second in the engine, and every single one of them has a unique, memorable character design. For all of these things to dash around the screen in short bursts of 2 to 3 minutes for each level must have required such hyperactive attention to detail that my mind can't even begin to fathom how they accomplished making this game. But I'm so grateful though, because as a massive fan of animation, being able to play and interact with what is basically a 1930s era cartoon was hugely satisfying to me. On top of that, the jazzy soundtrack is a banger. And we're not talking like the Italian restaurant type of jazz, okay? Rather, when you watch Whiplash or La La Land and hear those characters talk about jazz, the stuff that Cuphead blasts through your eardrums is exactly what they're referring to. Canadian composer Christopher Madigan put every ounce of creative impulses he had into making a score that is absolutely ferocious. Some of the tracks might feel similar due to their tempo and tone, but otherwise, all of the pieces you'll hear during the core gameplay are unpredictable and full of energy, constantly hitting you with new notes and chord progressions. In a way, the music perfectly matches the tone of the gameplay itself, which is that of always being on edge. But again, this is what makes it so fun. All in all, Cuphead is a game that knows how to be difficult. Players have complained about how tough it is, and that's perfectly understandable, but given how this turned out, I wouldn't have it any other way. The high intensity I experienced from every second of the game taunted me to beat it all, and each time I progressed further, the feeling of satisfaction I got each time was just incredible. I'm excited for when I can go through it all again, but until then, know that this grueling, beautifully animated, and endlessly fun experience is one of my favorite games of all time.